The sun rose over the spires of King Aldric's castle like a burning promise. From the highest tower, banners of crimson and gold fluttered, proclaiming his reign to all who dared look upon the kingdom of Arinder. Within the stone walls, the king sat upon a throne carved from the blackened heart of an ancient oak, gilded in gold, diamonds glittering like captured stars. Around him stood advisors, merchants, and nobles, each eager to claim his favor. By his side, ever watchful, was Sir Rowan, his most trusted knight. Strong, silent, and unyielding, Rowan had sworn a vow long ago to guard the king with his life. Together, they had led armies into battle, crushed revolts, and expanded Arinder's borders. No enemy dared stand against them, for where Aldric commanded, victory followed. The court buzzed with news of faraway lands, of rich treasures yet to be claimed, and of alliances waiting to be forged. King Aldric, proud and unafraid, smiled, his fingers brushing the jeweled hilt of his sword. In that moment he was the master of all he surveyed, the sun in a world of shadows. Yet, beyond the walls of stone and gold, a chill wind stirred. Rumors whispered through villages, carried by merchants and wandering bards. The northern lords spoke of rising armies, the southern fields whispered famine, and some even murmured of a sickness that no healer could mend. Aldric did not hear these whispers yet, but Rowan did. The knight's eyes, dark and sharp as a falcon's, scanned the horizon, uneasy. For all the wealth and power, Rowan sensed a storm brewing, one that no sword or shield could keep at bay. Days passed, and the golden halls of Arinder rang with laughter and feasting. Yet a shadow crept quietly at the edges of the king's world. News arrived from the northern marches. Small villages had been burned, their people slaughtered by raiders. Soldiers sent to investigate returned with tales of strange banners, black with a serpent coiled around a crown. Aldric frowned, brushing the reports aside. "A minor rebellion," he said with a wave of his jeweled hand. "Our armies will crush them in a fortnight." But Rowan did not dismiss it so easily. That evening, as the torchlight flickered in the hall, he leaned close to the king. "Sire," he whispered, his voice low and steady, "this is no simple uprising. These forces are organized. They will not be easily defeated." Aldric's laughter echoed through the hall. "Rowan, always seeing monsters where there are none. Leave the worries to me. I am the king. I command armies, gold, and loyal men. No shadow can touch me." Still, Rowan could not shake the unease gnawing at his chest. That night, he patrolled the castle walls, watching the forests beyond, listening to the wind that carried distant cries like a warning. Somewhere, in the darkness, the first seeds of ruin had already been sown. By dawn, the first signs of trouble reached the capital itself. Traders arrived with empty wagons, their faces pale, muttering of failed harvests and dying livestock. The markets, once overflowing with grain and wine, were now half empty. Fear whispered through the streets, and for the first time, even the proud citizens of Arinder looked to the throne with unease. Aldric, seated in his sunlit hall, watched the worried faces of his people, dismissing their fear with a wave of his hand. But Rowan saw it, knew that the king's world, so full of gold and certainty, was beginning to crack. And the knight realized, with a weight heavier than any armor, that no sword could shield them from what was coming. The stage is set, and the first threads of disaster are beginning to touch the kingdom. Arinder's golden halls, once alive with music and celebration, now hummed with suspicion. The people's unease had reached the court, and whispers slithered like snakes between nobles. Some spoke of Aldric's growing arrogance, of his dismissing the famine in the north. Others murmured about alliances he had made, questionable promises to neighboring lords who might not be loyal when the real storms came. In the quiet corners of the castle, men who once bowed eagerly now exchanged glances heavy with doubt. One such man was Lord Varon, a longtime advisor who had grown jealous of Aldric's favor toward Rowan. He had watched the knight rise in the king's esteem while his own counsel was ignored, and in his envy, a dangerous thought took root. Perhaps the king did not see the true threat. the one that could be leveraged for power. Varin approached the king one evening, smiling with false warmth. "Sire," he said, bowing low, "perhaps it is time to consider alliances beyond our borders. Some lords grow restless, and loyalty, even among the closest, can waver in the shadow of famine and fear." Aldric, ever proud, dismissed the words with a wave of his hand. "I command my people, Varin. My armies are loyal, my coffers full. No shadow can touch Arinder while I sit on this throne." Rowan, standing silently behind the king, felt the chill in Varin's words. He had seen envy turn men to betrayal before, and he knew the signs. Yet the king did not heed him, laughing off the danger as he always had. That night, Rowan walked the halls in the moonlight, listening to the soft creak of the castle. He heard whispers that were not meant for the king's ears. Plans, secrets, a thread of conspiracy weaving through the walls. Something was moving in the dark, something that would not wait for the famine, or the northern raiders, or even the sickness that had begun creeping through the villages. And in that silent hour, Rowan knew that the real threat was not outside the castle, but within it. The court's cracks deepened, setting the stage for betrayal. The dawn came gray and cold over Arinder, as if the sky itself mourned the kingdom's fate. Word arrived from the northern marches that the raiders had struck again, this time not villages but fortified towns. Arinder's soldiers, stretched thin and weary from earlier campaigns, were driven back with heavy losses. Panic whispered through the city streets. Markets that had once thrived now lay empty, and hunger gnawed at the people like a relentless beast. In the throne room, Aldric's anger burned hotter than any fire in the hearth. He summoned his generals, demanding swift action, but their reports only fed his frustration. Soldiers had deserted, supplies were dwindling, and worst of all, the neighboring lords, those whom Varin had whispered about, refused to send reinforcements. Their banners, once pledged in allegiance, now fluttered in silence. Rowan stood at the king's side, his hand on the hilt of his sword, eyes dark with warning. "Sire," he said quietly, "we cannot face this alone. Our strength is waning, and men will follow the coin, not loyalty, if we cannot protect them." Aldric's pride flared. "I am the king. My command alone is enough." He thundered, but even as the words left his lips, he saw it. The fear in his general's eyes, the hesitation in his council, the doubt creeping into every corner of his hall. That night, the first act of betrayal struck. Lord Varin, who had long nursed envy and ambition, led a faction of nobles in secret. They seized control of the city gates, cutting off reinforcements, and sent word to Arinder's enemies that the king's army was weak and divided. Within hours, the northern raiders, guided by Varin's treachery, marched straight into the heart of the kingdom. Aldric's throne, once a symbol of unshakable power, became a gilded cage. The roar of battle echoed through the castle walls, the golden banners trampled beneath the boots of invaders. Men who had once sworn loyalty to the king now fought against him. Through the chaos, only Rowan remained steadfast, fighting to protect the king even as the walls crumbled around them. He pulled Aldric to the back chambers, away from the carnage, his face grim. "We must leave, sire. Now, your crown will not save you here." For the first time, Aldric felt the sting of helplessness. The armies, the gold, the glory, all that had defined him, were slipping through his fingers. And as the castle burned behind them, he realized that the world he had commanded was gone. The fall of the king's power has begun, and his world is unraveling. Night had swallowed Arinder's capital, the city now a smoldering ruin under the enemy banners. King Aldric, once surrounded by gold and loyal soldiers, stumbled through the smoke-filled streets with Rowan at his side. The king's robes, once resplendent, were torn and soiled. His crown, a symbol of dominion, had been lost in the chaos. They fled into the wilderness beyond the city walls, where the forest loomed dark and silent. Rowan guided the king along narrow paths, avoiding patrols and enemy scouts, his hand steady on Aldric's shoulder, urging him forward. "Sire, we must keep moving. Hunger, cold, and danger await, but here in the wild, we may yet survive. Aldric, his pride bruised as deeply as his body, stumbled on a root. Survive, he muttered bitterly. I am a king. I command armies. I am not meant to scavenge like a common man. Rowan's eyes were hard, unwavering. A king who cannot endure hardship is no king at all. If you live, we will fight another day, but only if you learn to survive. The forest closed around them, the air thick with the scent of wet earth and decay. They foraged for food, roots, berries, whatever the forest grudgingly offered. Streams ran cold and bitter, and at night, they huddled together for warmth, listening to the distant howls of wolves and the rustle of unseen creatures. Aldric's hands, once used to holding swords and signing decrees, trembled as he lit a meager fire. Hunger clawed at his belly, cold gnawed at his bones, and every step through the mud was a reminder that he was no longer a king of riches or armies. Rowan watched him silently, recognizing the pain of a man forced to confront mortality and weakness for the first time in his life. Yet, through it all, Rowan remained steadfast, a shield of loyalty in a world that had turned against them. Tomorrow, the night whispered into the night. We will move east, to the hills. There we may find safety, or at least the chance to rise again. Aldric stared into the flickering firelight, the reality settling upon him like a stone. He was no longer a ruler of men. He was a man like any other, vulnerable, hungry, and afraid. The king's life of luxury is over. Survival has become his only concern. The forest path narrowed as Aldric and Rowan crept deeper into the wilderness, the morning mist curling around gnarled trees like ghostly fingers. The king's stomach twisted with hunger, and every snapping twig made him flinch. Rowan, ever vigilant, moved ahead and behind, scanning the underbrush with eyes honed by years of war. It happened just after midday. A shout cut through the silence, rough and mocking. From the shadows of the trees, a group of bandits emerged, their faces masked, weapons glinting in the pale light. Aldric froze, terror rooting him in place, while Rowan drew his sword with a calm swiftness born of countless battles. Give us your coin, the leader barked. Everything you've got, or you die in the forest. Aldric's lips quivered. I have nothing. Nothing but my life. Rowan's eyes narrowed. Sire, step behind me. He raised his blade, body tense like a coiled spring. They will take nothing from us. Not today. The bandits laughed, advancing, but Rowan moved with deadly precision. Each swing of his sword was measured, efficient. Each step a trap. Aldric, for the first time, felt the raw terror of battle not as a commander giving orders from safety, but as a man fighting for survival. One bandit fell, another screamed as Rowan's blade forced him to flee, but the fight was not without cost. One bandit slashed at Aldric, grazing his arm. The king stumbled, pain searing through him, and the cold reality of mortality pressed down. Rowan's face was grim as he fought off the last of the attackers. We are not safe, sire, he said once the forest fell silent again. The world is full of men who will kill for a scrap. We must move swiftly and keep your wits, or we will not survive the night. Aldric sank to a mossy log, trembling. I thought I knew what danger was, he said quietly, voice breaking. But this is nothing like the battlefield I commanded. Rowan rested a hand on his shoulder, firm and grounding. Commanding soldiers is easier than facing men with nothing to lose. You will learn, sire, or the forest will teach you the hard way. The king stared at the ground, shame and fear mingling with the sting of his arm. For the first time he understood. In this new world, crowns and titles meant nothing. Only strength, cunning, and loyalty could keep a man alive. The wilderness has claimed its first battle, and Aldric is learning survival in the harshest way. Days blurred into each other as Aldric and Rowan pressed deeper into the wilderness. The forest no longer seemed a refuge. It was a harsh tutor, teaching lessons in scarcity and pain. Food became scarce. What little they found was bitter roots, spoiled fruits, or small game they barely managed to catch. Aldric's hands shook as he tried to split wood for a fire, his muscles unaccustomed to labor. Rowan watched him silently, patience worn thin by worry. "You must eat, sire," he said, handing the king a small, charred rabbit they had managed to kill. "Weakness will kill faster than any sword." Aldric stared at the morsel as if it were poison. I am not used to this," he muttered, voice hollow. "In my halls, men feasted while I dined on golden platters. How am I to survive on this pitiful scrap?" Rowan's jaw tightened. "By remembering that survival has no regard for pride. Today it is this rabbit. Tomorrow it may be a turnip or a piece of stale bread. Adapt or you die." As hunger gnawed deeper, the king began to feel its cruel weight. Every step became agony, every night colder than the last. He dreamed of the castle, its golden halls, its warm hearths, the laughter of his people, and woke to the bitter reality of mud, blood, and the ache of empty stomachs. One evening, they stumbled upon a ruined farmhouse, long abandoned. The walls were sagging, the floor littered with debris, but they found a small store of grain and a few dried herbs. Aldric's eyes brightened, but Rowan's face was wary. "We take only what we need. Too much draws attention and others will fight for it." That night, huddled near the weak fire, Aldric spoke softly, almost to himself. "I once ruled a kingdom, and now I am nothing but a beggar in the forest. How quickly a man can fall." Rowan's voice was gentle yet firm. "You are not nothing, sire. You are still alive, and as long as you live, there is hope. But the forest cares not for hope. It respects only those who endure." The king's pride, battered and bruised, began to shift. Survival was no longer about glory or gold. It was about hunger, fear, and the unbreakable bond with the knight who had never abandoned him. The wilderness tightens its grip, teaching Aldric humility and endurance. The forest seemed endless, a green and gray prison that offered little comfort. But as they pressed further into the hills, a new terror made itself known: sickness. It began quietly. Aldric felt a chill run through him, his stomach twisting in pain. A fever came next, burning him through the night. Rowan, though strong and hardy, watched the king with growing dread. "Sire, we must rest. You cannot push your body like this. The forest will take no mercy if you fall." Aldric shook his head, sweat matting his hair. "I cannot stop. Every moment we linger, the enemy closes in. I am a king. I cannot lie weak while men plot and armies march." Rowan knelt beside him, gripping the king's shoulder with hands rough from years of battle. "You are a man first, sire. A king second. Live or all our efforts are for nothing. Trust me." Days passed in a haze of fever and delirium. Aldric's body weakened. His vision blurred, and he heard voices in the wind, whispers of the kingdom he had lost, the treasures, the throne, the people he could no longer protect. Rowan scavenged herbs, boiled water, and kept the fire alive through cold nights, offering what little comfort he could. One night, Aldric cried out in his fevered dreams, calling for his crown. Rowan, grim and determined, held him down gently. "The crown is gone, sire. All that remains is life. Focus on that." When dawn broke, Aldric's fever had not fully left, but his mind cleared enough to see Rowan's steady gaze. I never knew life could be this cruel," he whispered, voice hoarse. "To lose everything, my people, my kingdom, even my pride." Rowan's reply was soft but unyielding. "And yet here you are, alive. That is the first victory. The forest, the plague, the enemies, they have not claimed you. As long as you breathe, there is still a path forward." Aldric realized that life without a crown, without gold or armies, was more fragile and precious than any battle he had ever commanded. And though despair clawed at his heart, he clung to Rowan's unwavering loyalty, the one constant in a world that had betrayed him at every turn. The king now faces not only hunger but disease, and the bond with Rowan becomes ever more vital. Even as Aldric began to regain some strength, the wilderness offered no true safety. Rumors of the fallen king's flight spread quickly. Scouts, mercenaries, and rival lords, all hungry for power and wealth, scoured the lands. The once great king, stripped of armies and guards, was now a prize for anyone bold enough to claim him. One evening, as the sun bled crimson over the hills, Rowan halted abruptly, hand raised. "Sire, someone follows us. See the smoke curling between those trees?" Aldric squinted, heart pounding. He had never felt fear like this. Not on the battlefield. Not when leading thousands, not even when standing on his throne amidst whispers of betrayal. How can they find us in this vast forest? Rowan's eyes were sharp, scanning the treeline. Men with skill and greed. They hunt not for honor, but for your crown, or what remains of your treasure. We cannot outrun them forever. We must prepare. They made a camp in a hidden hollow, barricading themselves as best they could. Rowan kept watch through the night, sword ready, eyes burning with vigilance. Aldric, trembling from the cold and lingering sickness, tried to grasp the weight of his situation. He had been a king who commanded thousands, yet here, his survival depended on the loyalty of a single knight. At midnight, the first attackers struck. 5 men, swift and silent, emerging from the shadows. Rowan met them head-on, a whirlwind of steel and precision. Aldric could only watch, frozen with fear, as men fell around him. One bandit lunged toward him, and Rowan's blade caught the intruder in a spray of sparks and blood. When the dawn came, the attackers were gone, leaving the forest eerily silent. Rowan wiped his sword clean and turned to the king. "We cannot linger, sire. Every step we take is a gamble, every night a battle. The world has not yet forgotten the man who once ruled it." Aldric looked at his hands, scarred, trembling, empty of all he had once possessed. I thought power could protect me from everything," he whispered. "I was wrong." Rowan knelt beside him, gripping his shoulder. "No power can shield a man from hardship, but loyalty, courage, and endurance, they can carry him through even the darkest night." The king's world had shrunk to a single, desperate truth: survive or be claimed by the shadows that hunted him. Their enemies are closing in, and Aldric must now rely completely on Rowan's guidance and skill. For weeks, Aldric and Rowan moved through the hills and forests, following hidden paths known only to the night. Their survival depended on trust, and yet trust had become a fragile thing. One evening, a weary traveler appeared on the trail, claiming to be a loyal subject of Arinder who had escaped the city. "I know of a safe haven," the man said, eyes bright with what Aldric wanted to believe was honesty. "A village where you can rest, eat, and gather men. No one will find you there." Aldric, still weak from hunger and sickness, felt a spark of hope. Rowan, however, narrowed his eyes. "We know little of this man. Even the kindest voice can hide a dagger." But Aldric, desperate and clinging to the hope of shelter, pressed onward. "We have nowhere else to go, Rowan. We cannot flee endlessly." The man led them to a clearing, and from the shadows of a ruined homestead, more figures emerged. Armed men, faces grim, weapons glinting. Rowan's instincts screamed, and he drew his sword, positioning himself between Aldric and the strangers. You led us here," Rowan growled, recognizing the betrayal. The traveler smiled thinly. "The king in exile, a prize beyond measure. Hand him over and you may yet live." Aldric's heart sank. The man he had trusted, a supposed subject, had betrayed him for greed. He realized, with bitter clarity, that the world he had ruled was filled with men who had only waited for weakness to strike. Steel clashed in the clearing. Rowan fought with ferocity, holding the attackers at bay while Aldric struggled to rise, trembling but unwilling to give in. Each swing of Rowan's sword sent men fleeing, yet there were too many. Exhausted, the knight finally grabbed Aldric's arm. "We cannot stay. We must run now." They fled into the forest, hearts pounding, limbs screaming with fatigue. Behind them, the sounds of anger and pursuit faded into the night, but the lesson lingered. Aldric understood, painfully, that betrayal could come from any direction. Not just enemy armies, but the very people he had once considered loyal. And in that darkness, with only Rowan at his side, he realized the harsh truth. Survival was no longer about pride, titles, or armies. It was about trust, vigilance, and relying on the few who truly stood by him. Aldric has learned betrayal the hardest way, and his dependence on Rowan is absolute. The forest grew denser as Aldric and Rowan pressed onward, the weight of exhaustion pressing down on their shoulders. Hunger, sickness, and betrayal had worn them thin, yet the night never faltered, always scanning the treeline for threats. One evening, as twilight bled into the hills, they reached a narrow ravine. A rickety wooden bridge spanned the chasm, old ropes fraying and wood creaking under their weight. Rowan tested the first step, feeling the unstable planks shift beneath him. "We must cross carefully," he warned. "One misstep and we fall, and neither of us survives." Aldric's legs trembled as he stepped onto the bridge, each sway of the ropes sending waves of panic through him. The wind whistled through the ravine, carrying the smell of damp earth and death. Midway across, a sudden snap echoed, the ropes tearing, and Aldric froze in terror. Rowan lunged, gripping the king's arm and yanking him back from the edge. "Hold on, sire," he shouted, straining against the weight and the wind. For what felt like an eternity, the bridge shuddered beneath them. Rocks far below waited like hungry jaws. Aldric's hands clawed at the ropes, knuckles white with fear. He realized, with horrifying clarity, that he was utterly powerless without Rowan's strength and skill. Finally, Rowan managed to pull him across to the other side, both of them collapsing onto solid ground, gasping for breath. Aldric's chest heaved, and for the first time, he tasted the sharp tang of mortality. I nearly died," he whispered, voice trembling. "I am not a king here. I am nothing." Rowan's expression was grave, but his hand remained firm on the king's shoulder. "And yet you live. That is what matters. The forest does not care for crowns or glory, only for those who endure. Today you learned that life itself is the greatest victory." Aldric stared into the darkness of the ravine, the shadows below reminding him that death could come at any step. His world had shrunk to this. Survive, follow Rowan, and trust no one but the knight who had never abandoned him. The forest seemed silent afterward, as if holding its breath. Aldric realized that each day in this wilderness was a battle more grueling than any war he had commanded, and that Rowan's unwavering loyalty was his only shield against the relentless cruelty of the world. The king has faced death and survived, learning the fragility of life and the value of unwavering loyalty. Weeks bled into months, and the wilderness grew colder and harsher. Hunger gnawed at Aldric relentlessly, sickness lingered like a shadow, and the memory of betrayal haunted his every step. Each day became a fight against despair, the once proud king feeling smaller and weaker with every passing sunrise. One gray morning, they stumbled upon a dried-up riverbed, the cracked earth offering nothing but dust and bitter stones. Aldric sank to the ground, trembling. I cannot go on like this," he whispered, voice hollow. "I have lost everything, my kingdom, my crown, my men, even hope." Rowan knelt beside him, placing a hand on the king's shoulder. "Sire, listen to me. I will not abandon you. We may be starving, weary, hunted, but surrender is not an option. The forest is cruel, yes, but we are still alive. That is all the world asks of us right now." Aldric's eyes filled with tears, unaccustomed to the humility and helplessness of a man stripped of power. "I never imagined life like this," he admitted. "To crawl, to beg for scraps, to be at the mercy of hunger. It is a torment I cannot bear." Rowan's gaze softened, but his grip remained firm. "You bear it because you must, and because I stand with you. Life is cruel, sire, but it is also persistent. We endure, and one day we rise again, or at least live to tell the tale." They spent the night huddled in a hollowed tree, shivering from cold and hunger. Aldric, staring at the rough bark above him, felt the weight of every loss pressing down, the memory of golden halls, loyal soldiers, and feasts fading into a dream. Yet Rowan's presence beside him, constant, unflinching, offered a fragile thread of hope. Dawn brought no relief, only the same endless struggle. But Aldric, with a shiver and a deep, trembling breath, made a silent vow he would survive. Not for glory, not for wealth, not for power, but because Rowan had never left him, and because life, in its cruelest form, still demanded that he endure. Hunger and despair have nearly broken the king, but Rowan's loyalty keeps the spark of survival alive. The forest opened briefly into a valley bathed in golden sunlight, a strange contrast to the gloom that had gripped Aldric and Rowan for months. In the distance, smoke curled lazily above a small village, the faint sound of laughter and hammering reaching them. Rowan paused, eyes narrowed. "Sire, this could be sanctuary or a trap. We must tread carefully." Aldric, weak and weary, struggled to his feet. Sanctuary? After all this time, could it truly exist? His voice was a whisper of hope, fragile but persistent. They approached the village cautiously, blending with the shadows. Rowan observed the villagers, farmers, craftsmen, and children, busy with their daily labor, none showing hostility. One old woman noticed their tattered clothing and gaunt faces, her eyes softening. She offered them water and a small portion of bread without a word, a gesture so simple yet so powerful that Aldric nearly wept. Rowan stepped forward, bowing slightly to the villagers. "We mean no harm. We seek only food, shelter, and rest." The villagers nodded in understanding. For the first time in months, Aldric felt the weight of constant fear lift, replaced by the cautious warmth of trust. Sitting by the fire that night, he broke the bread into small pieces, savoring it as if it were the finest feast. Rowan watched him quietly, knowing this was more than sustenance. It was a reminder of life, a glimmer of hope that they had thought lost forever. Aldric leaned back, exhaustion heavy in his bones. "I almost forgot what it was like to be cared for, Rowan, to be seen as more than a hunted man." Rowan's eyes softened, his hand resting briefly on the king's shoulder. "And now you remember, survival is not just enduring hunger and danger. It is also recognizing the small mercies, the fleeting moments of humanity that remind us why we fight to live." That night, as Aldric slept for the first time without fear of immediate pursuit, Rowan remained vigilant, knowing the world outside the village could still bring death. Yet for the first time, a fragile hope took root. Perhaps they could survive, perhaps they could endure, and perhaps one day, reclaim some measure of what was lost. Aldric experiences a glimpse of hope and the kindness of strangers, giving him the strength to continue. Weeks in the village allowed Aldric to regain some strength, yet the golden life he had once known felt impossibly distant. Each meal, each night of shelter, reminded him that he was no longer a king but a man struggling to endure. His hands, once accustomed to fine silks and jeweled-hilted swords, were calloused and rough from laboring in the fields and gathering firewood. Rowan watched the transformation silently. The king had survived raiders, betrayal, hunger, and sickness, but survival demanded more than courage. It demanded humility, patience, and acceptance. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Aldric sat on a weathered bench outside the village, staring at the stars beginning to pierce the twilight. "Rowan," he murmured, "I thought I would rise again, reclaim my kingdom, and command armies as before. But I am not the man I was. Perhaps I can never be that king again." Rowan knelt beside him, eyes steady. "No one remains unchanged, sire. What you were is gone, yes, but what you are now is stronger than gold, stronger than armies, stronger than a throne. You know fear, hunger, loss, and loyalty firsthand. That knowledge cannot be taken from you." Aldric's hands trembled as he clenched them together. "I am alive only because of you. Every battle, every betrayal, every step in this forest. Rowan, I owe my life to you." The knight shook his head, firm and unwavering. "You owe me nothing. I swore an oath, and I keep it. You live, we endure, and that is enough." The king looked at his reflection in the water of a nearby stream, seeing a man hollowed by hardship yet hardened by survival. No crown rested on his head. No armies bowed to his command. And yet, for the first time, he felt a different kind of strength. A quiet, unyielding power rooted in endurance, loyalty, and the knowledge that life, even stripped bare, could still hold meaning. Aldric realized that the world he had once ruled had vanished, but in its place, a new world awaited. A world in which he could still live, learn, and perhaps, in time, reclaim a measure of peace. The king accepts his new reality, shaped by hardship and the steadfast loyalty of Rowan. The first light of dawn spilled over the hills, soft and golden, painting the village in a quiet, hopeful glow. Aldric stood at the edge of the forest, the morning breeze carrying the scent of earth, smoke, and life. For the first time in many months, he felt the world not as a ruler, but as a man vulnerable, weary, yet alive. Rowan stepped beside him, hand resting briefly on the king's shoulder. "Sire," he said softly, "we have endured storms no throne could protect you from, and still we stand. Today is another day to survive, and perhaps one day to thrive again." Aldric nodded, gazing across the valley. The village stirred below them. Children ran to fetch water, farmers tended their fields, and the smoke of hearth fires curled into the sky. The simplicity of life struck him more profoundly than any palace ever could. He thought of the crown he had lost, the gold, the armies, the glory, and understood that none of it could teach a man what it truly meant to live. "I was a king of men once," he murmured, voice thick with emotion. "Now I am a man among men. I have nothing, yet I have everything that matters. You, Rowan, life, and the strength to endure." The knight's face, weathered and steady, broke into the faintest hint of a smile. "That is more than most kings ever learn, sire. Hold on to it. Never forget what survival has taught you." Aldric took a deep breath, feeling the chill of the morning air in his lungs, the warmth of the rising sun on his face. Behind him lay a trail of loss, betrayal, and pain. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also possibility. The forest, the hunger, the sickness, the enemies, they had all shaped him. And now he would face whatever came next not as a king commanding armies, but as a man tempered by hardship, guided by loyalty, and unbroken in spirit. He turned to Rowan. "Let us go forward, not for crowns, not for glory, but simply to live, to endure, to be free in the only way that truly matters." Rowan drew his sword, not in battle, but as a gesture of companionship. "Then we move together, sire, always together." And so, the two walked into the morning light, the ruins of the past behind them, the uncertain path ahead, but the bond between king and knight stronger than any crown, any army, or any treasure could ever be. In the quiet majesty of survival, Aldric discovered the truest power of all, the will to endure and the unbreakable strength of loyalty. The forest whispered around them, but this time, it carried no threat, only the promise of a new dawn. The saga concludes with Aldric's transformation. From a king of riches and armies to a man forged by survival, bound to the loyalty of the one true companion who never left his side.